On behalf of the Aspen Institute, I welcome you all and thank you all for making us part of your exciting weekend. We're thrilled to once again partner with Theater Masters on this great event. This is now our 11th year of collaboration, and I have the privilege of introducing Theater Masters Artistic Director Julia Hansen, who will be moderating the discussion tonight. Julia Hansen is the founder and executive director of Theater Masters. While president of the Drama League of New York, Julia founded the Directors Project, a national training program for young directors. She's served on the boards of the Acting Company, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, the Society of Stage Directors and Choreographers Foundation, the Lincoln Center, and the advisory board for DramaWorks in West Palm Beach, Florida. And of course, she's our friend here at the Aspen Institute. We are so lucky for the relationship that we have with you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to her. Thank you all for coming once again. Julia?
Thank you. Is this on? Is it on? Yes, it's on. Good. Well, thank you very much, Jillian, and we are thrilled to be here, and I welcome all of you to this collaboration between Theater Masters and the Aspen Institute. It is an honor to be tackling what we call big ideas, which we stole, of course, from the Aspen Institute, and relevant topics, from the point of view of emerging playwrights and distinguished members of the theatrical community. I would like to let our panel introduce themselves. They'll tell you where they're from, where they're at school, and something you don't know about them or can't guess from seeing them. And to my left is...
I'm Genevieve LeMay. I go to Glenwood Springs High School, and I live in Glenwood Springs. Something you may not know about me is that I'm related to John Wilkes Booth.
That's a big question and answer. We'll do that someday. Next.
My name is Lauren Wimmer. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I go to school at Carnegie Mellon University. And something you may not know about me, I've used this like my whole life, this fun fact. I haven't broken a bone yet.
My name is Steph Del Rosso, and I go to UC San Diego. And something you might not expect is that one of my favorite things to do is box. I like boxing, yeah.
Oh, watch out. Hi, my name is Marvin Gonzalez. I'm from Arizona State University. One thing you might not know about me just by looking at me is that I used to do ranch work when I was in high school and elementary school.
Hi, I'm Andrew Leynse, Artistic Director at Primary Stages in New York City, also Artistic Advisor to Theater Masters. Had the pleasure of coming out here almost 10, 11 years now. So, but also being with us in the next part of the chapter when we're in New York City. Something you may not know about me is I jumped out of an airplane with a static line chute.
Ooh. Well, there we are. You'll never know what you don't know about me. But so now, the Greeks taught us that theater is a place where people come to see the truth about life and social situations. Shakespeare actually reflected on this in Hamlet when he was instructing his actors before they were to perform for his stepfather, when he said, remember, the invention of theater is to hold a mirror up to nature. So now we can address our panel's discussion, which is, can theater help bridge the divide that we feel in this country? And let me add, any divide we feel as human beings. So to begin with, I'm going to ask our playwrights if they feel it is a responsibility to give us distraction, entertainment, advocate social change, enlighten, or expose us to people that we don't know and understand. Every playwright has a different point of view of what their role is in the theater, and I look forward to hearing everybody on this panel tell us what that answer, and then to what Andrew thinks a theater should do, could do, or is doing. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. Okay, off you go, Genevieve.
Well, I don't necessarily know that we have a certain responsibility other than to tell the truth, or our own truth, or what we perceive to be the truth, and then it's everyone else's. As viewers, they have more the responsibility, I think, to sort of look for theater and look for the truth. And so, yeah, I'd say the responsibility is more on the viewer than the playwright.
Wonderful. Lauren?
Yeah, I've been, thinking about this a lot this weekend I was working on a play about two talking couches, and everything that was going on in the world, I'm like, wow, why am I writing this play about two talking couches? But I think that, there's value in theater to both entertain and also to be a call to action. And I think there can also be a play that does both. I think that humor is a great way to bring in an audience and to kind of then at the end of the play kind of slap them with something that they can leave with, and a call to action. So I think both are very valuable right now.
Yeah, I think we do have a responsibility. I'm interested in theater that is like a little transgressive or that asks difficult questions, and I'm interested in theater that engages with point of view that I don't particularly share. But I'm also a little cynical in terms of I don't necessarily think that theater can. I've seen it's rare that I see theater that really calls people to action, and so I've been thinking a lot lately that I'm interested in just being a full human being, and like I'm lucky enough to just be a student right now, so I have time to put my energy elsewhere and volunteer my time. So yeah, I think like we as theater artists, since we have untraditional schedules and have a privilege to do this amazing thing, I've been thinking a lot about that this is a time where I can also engage with the world beyond just my craft.
I'm always uncomfortable telling artists what they should or shouldn't do, like especially being someone who just creates stuff for my gray matter on a regular basis. So I think I can only speak of myself, and I think as a writer, I think I have a personal responsibility to help I think that we've been recycling these same narratives over and over and over again since, I don't know, probably since like we were creating mythology and all that. And I think as like young or youngish in my case, playwrights, that I think it's our responsibility to kind of help reshape those narratives that kind of just get recycled generation to generation. And I think the world is a dynamic place, and I think it's changing right now. And I think that I can only speak for myself, is that I have a responsibility to help that dynamicism and that change occur faster than maybe it might if we weren't writing the stories that we're writing. So I feel like I have a personal responsibility to help kind of aid that, to be a change agent, I suppose.
Andrew, I'd love to have your perspective, which is, what do you like to produce? What theaters do you feel do work with social change? And how are you affecting all of us?
Well, I think today running a not-for-profit and being a trustee of an organization, whether it's in New York City or in Aspen, you have a responsibility to the public and what that cultural landscape that you want to do and create within your institution, and how it's represented around you is something that I'm very actively consumed with and thinking about when I'm planning my season of plays, planning the outreach that we do where we go into schools and we teach playwriting. So I think there's, whether you may call that political or not, I do think that there is a responsibility for institutions to be to represent the public as that landscape may be. I also think that there are many different types of theater, and there should be many different types of theater. And if we go back to the 60s when we had the bread and puppet theater and the living theater, and those were really called actions on a public, those were types of not-for-profits that actually did implement change. And even if you go back to Shakespeare, when he would call out the king in many of his monologues, that can be changed in itself.
So, Marvin, you were talking about a theater that you think is making an impact. Would you speak about the play that you were thinking about?
Well, yeah, there's a theater troupe called Culture Clash that, and I think for many years they kind of took the torch from Teatro Campesino, which is Luis Valdez's theater, in terms of creating dynamic, comedic Latino theater that's also satirical and political. And they've been talking about a lot of issues that I think that are still like relevant. They've been talking about it since the 80s. Issues with the border, issues with representation. They have a particular play called Border Town that is interesting because a lot of the play itself is crafted from personal interviews with people along the border in San Diego and also in Tijuana. And so their play is crafted from a multiplicity of perspectives, often perspectives that disagree, but they're all treated with the same dignity in terms of people's opinions and respecting that. And I think that when you have that sort of theater that represents multiple views and respects those multiple views, that there are opportunities to create adult dialogue. And I think that when people start talking about things and on like an equal level, where they're not automatically shutting down someone else's idea, I think that that's when we can begin to, as a people, start talking about things that are more complex than we often make them. Because I think most issues, the truth lies somewhere in the gray, but we tend to either take a black or white point of view on those.
Did anyone want to comment on what Marvin has said? Then go for it, Lauren.
I just really want to check out that play. I haven't heard of that before, but it sounds awesome. But, yeah.
Is there a resolve in that play?
Not really. And it was a play that was commissioned by La Jolla Playhouse. This was in the early 2000s, and I think people started to get really interested in border issues kind of a little bit right after that, because there was a lot of violence on the border related to the drug cartels. But I think that the end result of that was more just, the purpose for it was to create a dialogue specifically in that region. And then each of the performances were followed by kind of these like community talkbacks where people were able to engage with each other. But they did take that show across the country to various different places to talk about the issues of the border in areas like, New York and Florida, in the Midwest, where they're not necessarily affected by those issues because they're not immediate to them, or they're issues that are like they're more distant from their day-to-day peripheral issues. So I think, I don't know, like perhaps the end result is it affected a small group of people, but again, like what Stephanie was saying, it's very hard because theater itself by its nature has a limited audience to really get that message out to everybody. Like,
I'm from Ohio, so I think acorns are very important things.
Yeah, exactly.
Affecting one acorn makes a big difference, or planting one.
Yeah.
Lauren, why don't you talk about the play that you selected?
Yeah, a play that I was thinking about that's really inspired me right now is Mad Forest by Carol Churchill. And it's about the Romanian Revolution, and it's wildly theatrical. It's about the rise of Ceausescu and those affected by it. It focuses on a family living in poverty and being surveillanced. These are all things that happened during this time. And it also has wildly theatrical vignettes running through it. There's like a scene between a vampire and a dog, and it really, it's, to me, I have to reread the play, but to me, like right now, it's a play that I think could really resonate with people.
Yeah.
Guess who next?
Oh, well, I just read that play for the first time last week for school, and I found it super relevant to today, and like chilling how relevant, because I think, yeah, my professor was saying that she read it back in the day, and it just felt like this removed piece of history, like, oh, this is great, I'm learning about the Romanian Revolution, but it was.
What was your take of why it's relevant?
Well, I think it's how people deal with a demagogue, essentially.
That is
so
relevant.
It's definitely relevant.
There's going to be a comedy about building a wall.
Yeah, if that's funny. But yeah, so, and also I think kind of what you were saying, I think what Churchill is really skilled at is like she doesn't project her own point of view onto the characters. She treats all of her characters with dignity, regardless of whether she shares those points of view. So the families, the families with their different political views in that play, I felt like were all treated with dignity, and we were able to get into the nuances of their beliefs, despite not sharing them necessarily. Yeah, I would recommend it.
And
as
your
well.
play? What's the same one?
Oh, well, I'm like on this Carol Churchill kick. Fen by Carol Churchill, I think, is also really amazing. It mainly deals with the white working class. I think it's like in the 60s and 70s. And it's like love story, but also just a tale of like power dynamics between boss and laborers, and you kind of track 5 main protagonists during this difficult time. And again, I think truly like she just imbues all her characters with dignity, despite not sharing their point of view or being in that situation. And I think that that's something that, yeah, that's a skill that I think we as playwrights should all try to engage in. Just kind of getting outside of our own point of view, I think is important.
So is there another theater that you know of, a better way to do theater? How would you reach more people or change your perspective on where you would show your plays?
Me.
Yes, we can start with you, and then
Sure.
we'll move down. How can you affect a larger audience?
I mean, quite simply, a lot of it has to do with ticket prices. I think theater is too expensive, and I think theater spaces are too expensive to rent. So I think a lot of it is systemic, I think. And I think that a lot of stories that are being told are not a lot of audience members or potential audience members don't identify with those stories. So kind of what you were saying, a lot of the same stories are being told. A lot of those stories are told by people who look like me and only me. So I think that's one of the big barriers I think that we have right now. Yeah.
What was we talked about your play, or not? We talked about another play, not the one you chose, Marvin. I think, is that the one you chose?
Yeah, that's the one I chose.
Okay. Well, then we'll move on. All right.
I have some ideas about how we might change that system.
Good.
I can speak about some like personal experience I have. I'm working with a theater company right now in Phoenix, and we're really trying to make theater accessible to the Latino community there, because they're really just like if you go to certain parts of the city, there aren't theaters for one in the neighborhoods, and there aren't theater programs in the high schools that are predominantly Latino. So they're not people that are, it's not a community that's getting that sort of education from a young age or an interest in it. And there's not a lot of plays that are being presented to them that have characters that represent their histories and their stories. So we're really trying to, with this theater company, Teatro Bravo, we're trying to make, first of all, theater very cheap and accessible on multiple levels in terms of economically accessible, geographically accessible, and accessible in terms of the subject matter of the pieces that we present as well.
Andrew, come on back in.
Management.
I'm curious about ticket prices in New York City, your ticket prices, subsidized.
Yes, it's a big issue, and we're constantly struggling with it. I mean, and also our audiences, who's coming to the theater. Our average subscriber these days is about 72. And I'm being very serious about that. That's our average subscriber age. Wow. So if you're looking at the audience that are buying tickets in advance, that's not where, it's a much older audience. And so what a lot of us have done is we find opportunities to lower ticket prices, have pay what you can shows where we invite, we have a Tixteen program where we're bringing in high school students to see the shows. We do free student matinees. The truth is that the art is it doesn't pay for itself anymore, unless you're like a Hamilton on Broadway or something like that. And you have a long run, because most shows are 6 to 8 weeks, and off Broadway or on Broadway, maybe a little bit, maybe 12 to 14 weeks. And the economics producing, whether it's in Denver or it's in New York City, have gotten so they just keep going up. And So we're all struggling with ways of how do we make art in a very impactful way. How can we do, for example, one thing that we're doing is we're doing this program called Morning in America, and we reached out to about 150 of our playwrights, and we said, write something about the day after the election. And we got close to 90 one-minute plays. And now we're going to produce those next month in the theater. And that, most people were just excited about that call to action. And it's something that as an institution that we can do is provide that. And so I think we all have to be creative about the models are only going to get harder. They're not getting easier. And we all have to be creative about how we can make art.
Thank you. Now we're going to round this out because the first panel is almost over. Would each one of you tell us if there's a piece in the theater that has either moved you to action or made you really think about something that you can tell us about? Got an idea?
Sure. This is a pretty expected answer, I suppose, but I got to see Hamilton, and
We're glad you did.
but it's not so much the content, it's just the excitement around it and the excitement about theater and the excitement about being patriotic in a way that I feel like isn't very common. It's difficult to be patriotic right now, and I think it made me patriotic in a way that I didn't expect.
Lovely. Lauren?
A play that I think is really important right now, another play is An Octoroon by Brandon Jacobs Jenkins, and it's an adaptation of Dion Boucicault's The Octoroon, and I think it really examines identity in terms of race, and it also, he took a script that has a lot of stereotypes and a lot of harmful stereotypes, and being a black playwright, he played off of them, and it's just a great play. I definitely recommend that.
It's affecting you as a person. Did it affect you?
Oh yeah, like I saw it many times. I was in the rehearsal room, and then I saw performance after performance, because every time it was.
Did it make you take any actions?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it made me change the way that I view even my own race, and also, I think it forced me to think about, plays that I write and how they will age, with time. So I think in that way it changed me.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I think we're like on the same wavelength with plays. Another Brandon Jacobs Jenkins play, Appropriate, which is about a white family who discovers that they have Klan members in their past. So yeah, the way that it interrogates guilt and identity, I think definitely made me think well beyond. I mean, that's the goal too. You always want to write a play where people are thinking about it for like days, years ahead. I think the worst thing is if you just watch something and it's a wash and you forget it. Yeah, it definitely had an impact for me in that way.
Marvin?
Yeah, just thinking of like a play that's like pretty commercial, and actually I had a chance to see it when we were in New York when I was in Theater Masters last year. It was the musical Fun Home. I think it called me to action in the sense that I realized that like you can still make something that's really like small in terms of like the intimacy of the story and personal, and still about something that's relevant to society, and still have it to be still have something that is commercially viable, that like that is on Broadway and that's going to tour and stuff like that. Because I think that sometimes you get, as a writer, you're like, well, does anyone want to watch anything that I write? So should I try to bend myself more towards something that's a little bit more commercial, a little bit more audience friendly? And you can still make stuff that's audience friendly, that's also, I think, that's also relevant and impactful, I think, for what's going on today. And I think theater should be about what's happening right now, and regionally, what's happening in whatever country or whatever part of the country you're at. So that was inspiring to me, to just like keep writing the small intimate plays that I'm writing.
Andrew, is there one play that you have seen?
Well, I'll give a shout out to my own company.
I was going to give you that option.
Fade by Tanya Sriracha, a Latino playwright, and we're in previews. It opens on Wednesday, And so it's great to have a really fresh, dynamic Latino female playwright. So.
Thank you. Well, we're going to close this session down and welcome our second panel. All the playwrights will be available for questions afterwards. So this is panel 1. Stop it rolling. And we're going to go to panel 2. Well, obviously we don't count very well. We have a larger panel the second time, but it'll be a wonderful way to end. So we're going to start with introducing yourselves and again telling us something about that we don't know, and then where you're from. And I think this time I'm going to start at the far end.
Hi, I'm Kristin Field, and I'm currently studying at Northwestern. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia, and something you might not expect about me is that I won a prize for chemistry in my last year of high school, so help concern.
I'm Hannah Pusey. I'm doing my MFA at Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. I'm from Hampshire in England, and something you definitely won't know about me is I'm a fishmonger and butcher.
And I'm Yi Xuanzhen. I'm from Taiwan. I'm studying Arizona State University, and this is my second day to see the snowing.
Hi, my name is Melissa Annis. I'm the co-artistic director of Theatre Masters.
And welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. And I'm from Wales, and something you don't know about me, I speak Welsh as a first language.
My name's Abe Koogler. I am out of school. I'm a working playwright. And I grew up on a small island near Seattle called Vashon, which meant that I took a ferry boat every day to school.
Julia?
I'm Julia Izumi. I grew up in Manhattan. I go to Brown University, and something you might not know about me, I guess this is more like a story, but one time I received as a gift the Drama Desk Award for Best Play for Marvin's Room, but I returned it.
I'm Anna. I go to UCLA. I'm from Massachusetts originally, and something you don't know about me is that I once won a gold medal for a Russian-speaking competition.
So because of the wonderful diversity of this group, I was going to ask them a special question just directed to them. But before I do that, I do want to let you know that Abe, who is here as a VIP guest, did take 10 5 years ago? 5 or so years ago. He's been here as a visionary playwright at the Aspen Institute Summer Ideas Festival. He has had a play since then at Lincoln Center, and he has a play coming up that's being offered this summer at Manhattan Theater Club, and that is a really amazing accomplishment. So congratulations. And welcome home. Now, speaking of diversity and the fact that we have all these people in the panel, something that I would like to make a comment about, and I would like you to disagree or agree with me, either way will be just fine, but something makes me feel that more plays that are written about big ideas are tackled by non-Americans than the American theater. And that I see this when I go to England. I find plays about big ideas, whether I'm seeing, well, whatever you want to say, whether it be Old Pravda, about the paper industry, or Murmuring Judges, or Murmuring whatever it was, but when he did the threesome in Murmuring Judges, and he was attacking the church and turking the state. So do you feel that's true, or do you not? Now, I think it's only fair to start with the Americans, that they can either defend it or not, and then we'll move down the line. What do you think?
I think each culture has different ways of dealing with things, and individuals within cultures too, but I do think there is this very weird divide in America between the idea that the individual isn't special, but then you can kind of be this individual that is extraordinary and make it. So I think everyone is constantly dealing with this weird identity crisis of I don't matter, but maybe I could matter. And so I feel people it's more insular a little bit, I've noticed in America, but I don't know, I feel the only other theater I've seen outside of America has been in England, and then I've seen some Spanish theater. I don't know, so I think it really it depends, but I do think cultural identity plays a big part in it.
Julia, and then I'm going to skip to the end of the table and end with the center.
Yeah, I think I think, different cultures kind of express themselves in different ways. I think that's something that I've noticed, and I've seen some international theater just at like festivals presented in America, so they're still kind of in an American context. And I saw a couple in England, and maybe like one or two in Japan. But I think the narrative structure of American storytelling is like a little bit more, because we're so linked to Hollywood and film. It's their approach is a little bit more straightforward and naturalistic. Like I feel like that's kind of where they tend to gravitate towards. And I think other countries, because they don't have those forms of media as like a general like mass production in their culture, they take other ways in terms of like structure and getting into storytelling, and so a lot of their kind of like big idea plays come in different kinds of fractured segments, or in collages, in different ways of language, and like puppets, and those sorts of things. So I think they might take a different form route that may seem like they're more political just because it's a different way of approaching it, but they're all kind of still talking about similar things.
So just keeping in mind that the topic is sort of bridging a divide or dealing with a divisive situation. What do you have to say?
It's quite hard to answer for Australia because I feel like so much of the theatre there is brought over from the US or from the UK, which is fantastic. Like I love it when there's a really great production of a play I've heard of but wasn't able to see because I was in Melbourne. But the Australian plays I have seen and playwrights I love, I feel like I've seen some plays that tackle huge ideas like Lally Katz's Return to Earth, that's sort of dealing with how do you cope with becoming an adult, so something as huge as that. And other plays that tackle smaller ideas like the demise of the honeybee population, which can be very big in other ways, but was still focused on one family in one bee farm, and their sort of personal drama. So I think there is like a combination or sort of a push and pull between the two. Like there's always those big ideas in battle with or even assisting, the smaller ideas or the more personal aspects of any play.
There's this kind of famous saying that all American theatre is about race and all British theatre is about class, which I think may be a little bit of a generalization, but for the most part is possibly actually true. And I think American theatre, in my experience of studying it in the last few years, this kind of, the idea of the American family and plays set in the American home is a really big thing, which I don't know that British theatre really comes from the same place or deals with the same issues. I think both American and British theatre is trying to bridge a divide, but I think they're doing it in different ways. I think there's still kind of a long way to go on that front.
Ethan?
I don't think I can represent Taiwan, even, it's hard to represent myself. But I mean, the theater I want to talk about Snoopy Dog. Snoopy Dog is, the people think Snoopy Dog is dog, right? Then we see the Snoopy Dog is not a dog. We see the personality about the dog. So we think it is cute. So we see that we respect the difference and we see the similarity. Then. And another things we will feel afraid of is like sometimes the child will freak out by the baby doll, right? Because they assume they are the real human, but they see the different from the human. So the theater I try to create is about, I want to show the difference at the first time. Then help the people to see the difference. Then you will feel it's cute, right? But if you assume it's like you, then you see the different things and you feel afraid. So I think that's the theater I want to create. I cannot present anything, but I hope that's the theater I want to create.
Now, this was Melissa's idea,
Sorry,
so
guys.
we're going to let you, and why don't you and Abe have a little conversation with each other for a minute, but start with why this was your idea and what you feel about it.
Well, I just actually want to go back to the question for a second, just the idea of sort of big ideas in other countries versus America. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. When I first came here, I was so impressed with what was happening in theatre in America, because I grew up in a Welsh language household where I went to see a lot of English language theatre that didn't relate to my experience as a Welsh language person in my country. So I was always sort of trying to figure out what that was about. And then I came to America, and there were so many new plays that were discussing exciting things, like, that Dryland was recently one that I saw that was such a small story, but it had such a huge impact on me. And Octoroon is another one. Generations in Soho Rep blew my mind. I think that America takes more risks when it comes to plays than Britain does, actually, in many ways. The only difference is we have the funding to be able to put a lot more money behind those risks in Britain, which does make a difference. And I think that people sometimes respond to that as opposed to the stuff that's being written and not necessarily produced on a big stage. I also think your second question sort of why this question is, I think Meryl Streep gave such an incredible speech at was it the Golden Globes? Is that what she was speaking at? And she was saying, of course, we all know that that's why we go to the theatres. We learn about people. We open doors of empathy. We hope that we can learn about other people and be better people because of that, and therefore build a better society. I think that theatre is important because we can show people other perspectives, but we have to be careful that we don't just preach to the choir, because that's something I feel like we like to do. Our audiences are very comfortable with us. We're very comfortable with them. Maybe we need to go out and look for new audiences, and I think that's important at the moment. And I think that's how we bridge a divide at the moment, which is not a conversation at all, sorry.
That's okay. We don't. That was great. I mean, I was earlier today. I decided I was going to make. I want to stand up for American playwriting. I was going to make the argument that American playwrights are really good, actually, historically, at talking about class, and not as good at talking about power. Because I think if you look at every great, the United States is known for the family play, right? And if you look at all the great family plays, I think most of them are actually dealing significantly with issues of class. Now, it's a very specific type of class. It's like white middle to lower class or white middle to upper class. So that is a, very limited view. But they are talking about a class in a certain way. If you look at The Humans, one of the biggest hits on Broadway, that is a play about a family that is struggling to get by economically. And I think it's actually more about class than it is about, it's about both class and family. So I was going to say that we're great at class and not as great at power. And when I think of the British playwrights who I really love, like Harold Pinter, chief among them, Harold Pinter is he's not writing literally about politics, but he's writing very much about how power plays out in human relationships. Every line of his plays is about power. And then I started thinking, actually, we have David Mamet, who, gets a bad rap in a lot of ways, I think, these days, but actually, if you look at his early plays, he's writing tremendously about power in a very similar way that Pinter is, about how power is used between people. So class and power, I think we do have the ability to write well about. And race, I don't know. I think that, I think the playwrights who've been given platforms over the past 100 years, of course, have been predominantly white. So I think maybe we write less well about race, or the great plays about race have been given less prominent platforms in our culture.
And I think just to speak to that, I think one of the problems is, one of the situations we have is that producers need to see that that's something, a conversation needs to happen. We need to have more diversity within our producing pools as well, because the people who are putting on these shows are the people who should be curating. They're curating for us, essentially. So we need more diversity in the curating pool, I think, as well, so we can get those plays that we don't see very often on stage.
Yes.
To go back to sort of Pinter, I'm a huge Pinter fan, but I'm also a huge John Osborne fan, which deals with class and power and all the grey areas in between, and the violence of what it is to try and bridge a divide. And I think Look Back in Anger is the perfect example of a play that deals with black and white and everything in between and the violence that it causes in this tiny little apartment. So I think that, you know, when we do think about bridging gaps and having connections with other people, we also have to recognize that it's hard. Collaboration is hard, and we just have to find that common ground to be able to start collaborating. And I think that that is easily told in a play. I think that we're very lucky to have that.
So just for this panel, what about musicals? Do musicals face the question of big ideas? Do we come up with feelings that they have are justifiable in some ways because they are really asking us to stop those divisions? And can you think of one? Can you think of things, musicals that have affected you?
This might be like a personal bias, but I think Stephen Sondheim deals with pretty big ideas. I loved what was said in the last panel about Fun Home. It is such an intimate play, but in other ways deals with these huge weights sort of on society and on the individual members of the family. So I think musicals definitely have the ability to deal with big ideas. Perhaps with, you know, the larger budget, the expectation that the staging and everything is going to be grander and bigger, maybe that gives them a little bit more freedom to not sort of have such a narrow focus, or to tone everything down to think small instead of big, maybe.
Maybe more people go to musicals and therefore they get to see the question answered about big ideas. I mean, we can certainly say that's true of Hamilton.
I think that, Julia, would you share your story about South Pacific? I think it's such a wonderful story.
Well, we were talking about this, of course, over lunch today so we could plan the panel. And it was the last question I was going to ask, as I asked the last panel. Is there something that you can remember that really affected you or moved you or asked you to take action? And I have had 3 phases of my life with this. First, thinking, well, that's sort of cute, I don't understand it. Second, saying, wow, is that what they were really saying? And did I not get it? And am I getting it now? And now, as an older, what can I do? And what should I do? And how remarkably early this is. And I will read it to you, because I didn't plan this, but I will. And it was from, if you all remember, South Pacific. And it says, you've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly shaped and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late. You've got to be taught when you're 6 or 7 or 8 to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. And that just sends chills through my body every time I think about it, and I think about how I reacted to it when I don't think I was 7 or 8 in South Pacific, but I was young enough to realize that it was very young, and I thought and then, oh my God, were they really being able to say that to the public? And today, what that really means. So that's one thing that affected me tremendously in theater, and thank you for asking me to share it, because it still hurts. Go on, back to musicals, if you don't mind. Anyone else have a musical particularly?
The musical Rent was, I think it dealt with the AIDS crisis in a way that not much other theatre or other literature was dared to or was willing to at the time, and is also an example of a massive commercial success. And one of my favourite shows I've ever seen was a musical called Next to Normal, which is about bipolar depression, and it was stunning. And I think there's an idea to see all musicals as this kind of happy jazz hands show, and actually musicals don't have to be like that, and they can deal with very big ideas.
We don't have a lot of time unless someone else has a particular musical they want to say about. No? Do you have one? Julia, go ahead.
Oh, I don't have a specific one. I just wanted to kind of speak to the power of the musical. Just in that, like, I agree that it has, like, it definitely has a mass commercial appeal, and it has a tangible soundtrack that can reach a large
it stays with
audience.
you longer.
Yeah, and I think musicals are in a really tricky position right now, because I think Disney has done both like a great disservice and a great service to the idea of musical, because it is there's now a very strict kind of like expectations for like the grandness of what musicals should be, even though it started kind of, musicals did kind of start in a place where they were actually kind of being very abstract in their form, you know, using music to tell narrative and infusing it with story, and has now kind of become like a very formulaic commercial format, especially on Broadway. I think it's kind of tricky, but it's kind of also it's also kind of played a very big role in doing a lot of cultural appropriation in the process of kind of trying to expand into new audiences. And so it's kind of in this like musicals are in like a really tricky position right now, and I hope that people take responsibility for the power of it.
It seems to me musicals travel a lot. I mean, a lot. I mean, I can remember trying to have a meeting with Andrew Lloyd Webber. There's a musical, and it was quickly, I'm leaving for China tomorrow, so you've got to get all these singers for me in 4 hours. You know, it was 5 o'clock, 24 hours. Would you please get me Patti LuPone? Would you please get me Mandy Patinkin? Would you get me Bernadette Peters? In 4 hours, or otherwise we have to wait 2 weeks. And I said yes. Anyway, it worked out pretty well. I would like to ask Abe to say a little bit about the play that was on, because that dealt with a lot of questions, and the play that's coming up. It's only fair to hear what we get about them, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. So.
Yeah, my play that was at Lincoln Center was called Kill Floor, and it was about a woman who gets out of prison and has to take a job at a slaughterhouse in the small town she lived in previously, and about her attempts to reconcile with her young African-American son, who she has not seen for 5 years, for the amount of time that she's been in prison. So that was a play. You know, I believe very much that when writers sit down at their desks, they don't owe a responsibility to anyone or anything except their subconscious. So I wrote that play from my subconscious, and then I encountered a bunch of very thorny questions once I had finished writing it, because it was about people from a class that is not my own. I was writing, you know, this young African-American character in a small, mostly white town. So I was trying to write about experiences that are not my direct experiences. And that was a challenge. I think people who saw the play had really different reactions to how successful I was. And I don't know that I was fully successful. So these are...
I think you were.
Thank you, Julia. But I think these are questions that we all struggle with as playwrights. You know, what stories are we allowed to write? And what are our responsibilities when we try and write stories about people who are not like us?
So if anyone would like to quickly, as we wrap up, say a play that has really affected you and taken you to action or to thinking deeply, please do so. And if you don't have one, that's okay. But if you have one, lean forward to the mic, please.
I was going to say Detroit by Lisa D'Amour, just because compared to some of the other plays I've seen in the past, I didn't sort of walk away thinking, oh yes, I know what this play is about, or I know exactly how I relate to this play and what I took away from it. It was that sort of confusion, or like, oh, who are these characters? Yeah, what sort of impact has the play had on me? Yeah, sort of that unsurety, and having to put yourself, because that's sort of, I think, instinctively what an audience at least tries to do when they go to a play. They're trying to place themselves in the positions of the characters and the insane things these characters do in this play, and thinking like, oh, what's driven them to do that? Two characters who really have nothing in a relationship, and two characters who are very quickly moving towards having nothing, sort of. They're not quite there yet, but, you know, grasping on very tight. So, yeah, like the fact that I left wanting to think more about it and not quite knowing concretely what I'd taken away from it was really fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were lucky enough to get to see Anna Devere Smith at the Ideas Festival last year. And I don't know if anybody else saw the workshop that she did. Yeah, it was unbelievable, wasn't it? Yeah, it really just flipped something in me. And since seeing her performance, which was a workshop performance of dealing with the prison system and just the system in general, and how it works against some people, really was a call to action for me. And I then got involved with more, with actually just working towards prison reform, or working with friends of mine who sort of deal with that sort of thing, and writing more about incarceration and trying to understand more about the system that, you know, funnels into this. So that was a huge influence on me.
There's a Susan Laurie Parks play called The America Play. And I, when I encountered it the first time, I was so astounded because she uses language in a way that no other writer uses language, and her characters speak in a way I had never heard characters speak before. And regardless of how you feel about where we are now as a country, I think it's undeniable that our current president has begun to change the way we speak, and has actually created many phrases and sort of sentence constructions that have worked their way, and linguistic ideas that have now worked their way very seriously into our minds. And I think regardless of who is in power, it's our responsibility as artists and as citizens to think about the words we are using and to make sure that we are using words that reflect who we are. And I think that one of the jobs of a writer is to create new ways of speaking, which may create new ways of thinking.
So did you have one quickly? Because we're almost out of time. Okay. I'm going to wrap up by saying, and we'll have questions afterwards, but so here's my hope, that we as audience members, when we see a play that has a big idea, will recognize the characters before us, see their dilemmas, and then identify with those people and understand where they are. And because we are watching them sometimes, and it's not us, and that they are live situations, we will be able to be moved to action, think about it critically, and understand we can do something, and we all can make a difference. Thank you for joining us for this panel. We'll have questions in just a minute, but thank you, everyone, for being here. That's because we're going to cut the television in the back of the room, everybody. Now we're ready for questions. Thank you very much. All right, any questions?